I am an environmentalist is what got me into this industry, but I don't ever mention climate change. I don't mention global warming because it's too hard for most people to understand. It's like, these are like existential crises, like death. Like, I know I'm going to die someday, but it's not for a really long time. So I'll worry about it when it's a problem, right? It's like, okay, well, I want to eat healthy and take care of myself to live as long as possible, right? I don't want to necessarily take that approach, but a lot of people look at that, they kind of take that same philosophy. So I don't even bother with global warming, climate change, any of that stuff. It's just like, hey, like, it's good for the bottom line to be sustainable. It's good for the bottom line to go into your supply chain, look at your entire supply chain, and root the waste out from it.
We're all Mavericks.
Welcome to Momish Mavericks.
With your hosts, Maynard and Tove Breslow.
We're Olim and Gayrim.
And we're also entrepreneurs and marketers.
October 7th changed everything,
including the way we do business.
This is the show that realigns your business and goals
with your values and people. Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to Momish Mavericks podcast. Today we're joined by Jonathan Levy. Jonathan is the principal consultant, really the waste and recycling consultant here at Zero Waste Pros. Thanks for joining us today, Jonathan.
Thanks for having me. It's funny. I'm actually originally was just the zero waste guy, and that's what really got me into it. Just helping people, reduce waste in their lives. But you can't get hired by professional business clients and stuff and be the zero waste guy. So that's why I'm the zero waste.
You can be, right? I mean, that's the whole thing. I think you mentioned that you were an influence in the space, so I want to get into that. But today we're going to be talking about basically kind of that whole thing on clarity on how waste collection and recycling actually works in terms of like the strengths, limitations, public, private partnerships. There's a lot of stuff going in there, but a lot of value giving here as well in terms of how the waste industry actually makes money, and specifically how business owners can save money on their trash if you know this kind of stuff. And of course, talking about tips and tricks for individuals interested in reducing their own waste, which I think is the reason why you kind of got into it in the first place. But before we get into all the meat and potatoes, kind of walk me back, tell me your story a little bit, how you got to be kind of an influencer in the space, and everything that's led up to Zero Waste Pro.
How much time do you have?
Yeah, we got only 4 hours. Hopefully you can fill it in there.
No, whatever reason, I've always I grew up in the Bay Area, Northern California, near San Francisco. I always had a culture of like recycling, and I feel like people in the Bay Area have always had like environmental awareness more so than maybe other parts of the United States. So I always grew up with like recycling in my mind, and for whatever reason, I was always like really, I hated waste. I just hated like inefficient processes. I hated wasteful things. I was always someone, even before reusable water bottles and coffee cups were cool, I was always the person that's what I used, because I, for whatever reason, just made up in my mind that why would you throw something away that still has value? It's kind of interesting. I never knew my great grandparents, but they owned a junk store. They sold used suits, and they sold, I guess it would probably be what was known as a secondhand store now. But my dad and his siblings always refer to it as a junk shop, and they used to have fond memories as kids, as hanging out at the junk store that their grandparents, my great grandparents, how they earned a living.
Wow.
My dad owned a mini storage, and this was before like Storage Wars was like big. And, when times are tough, they'll pay every bill before their storage bill. They'll pay their rent, their mortgage, their credit card, their car payment, whatever, right? But they would, if they're going to skimp on something, it's a storage bill. And every now and then he would get stuck with people's stuff. And it always blew my mind about how much
he owned the storage place. It wasn't like a Storage Wars where he like bid on it like the show. He owned the storage location, and so he didn't have to do the bidding. It would just be in his possession now.
Yeah, okay. I mean, he would try. Technically, you're supposed to go to public auction. There's a big legal process. But this was before like Storage Wars glamorized that stuff. So there was never people fighting over these units. It was most of the time it was him just like getting rid of junk, because, people will pay to store things that they're attached to but don't necessarily have value. Mm-hmm. But there was also a lot of valuable items that he'd come across. So I share this because I don't know what it is. If it was like some sort of weird like grooming in a positive way of leading me in this direction of wanting to work in waste, but I just had lots of exposure to over my life to people, to seeing value in items and things that other people considered to be without value or wasteful. I even had my first business was my first business. Yeah, I guess when you look at it that way, when I was 15 years old, I had a job at a motorcycle shop for $5. And I would go for a couple hours a day after work and take apart motorcycles. It's kind of funny thinking about it now that I would get a check once a week for like $40 or $50 after taxes or whatever. And it really annoyed me that I was only making $5 an hour and I was taking apart these motorcycles. They would sell the parts for a lot of money. So when I turned 16, my dad had a pickup truck. Craigslist at the time was only in the Bay Area, and I would go on Craigslist. I'd find junk motorcycles, and I would buy them for $50 each, $100. Sometimes people just give them to me because they had them like just in their garage taking up space, and I would take apart the motorcycles and then I'd list them on eBay. And I would, instead of making $5 an hour, I would spend a weekend taking it apart. Then next weekend I would ship the parts, and I'd make $400, $500, $600
Wow.
per motorcycle, parting them out. It's kind of, I hadn't really thought about it since before you reached out to me, just how many instances of like conserving resources or finding value in trash or something that just occurred in my childhood, my formative years, that really kind of shaped
and also entrepreneurship.
Where we are today.
We don't think about sometimes. Oh, it's like how the entrepreneurship kind of is already within us and it gets expressed later on.
Yeah, I mean, my journey is my journey, but unfortunately, I spent a lot of time after going to college and then following the corporate route of what I quote unquote should do. And it wasn't until 12 years ago that I even got that I just discovered the waste industry. But I feel like I spent the first 10 years of my career kind of banging my head against the wall, trying to follow the corporate path, do what I should do, and hung up on salary and status or the role I had at a company rather than actually focus on making doing impactful work.
Yeah, very good. And I guess what was it then that you decided to stop beating your head against the wall and go up to a Zero Waste Pro?
I was working in a Target distribution center. It's a big American retailer, and it was almost 2 million square feet in size. To try and quantify that, it's about a quarter mile wide by a half a mile long. So it's very big, like bigger than a football field, and just filled with consumer goods and things. And I hated I was miserable. I mean, a lot of the misery was my own doing, my own way I was viewing the world and things. But I would get to the warehouse at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I would usually leave at about 5 at night. And I found myself, my background in supply chain management, and here I was in this warehouse optimizing the flow of these consumer goods through this infrastructure. I never heard of the term zero waste. I thought of myself as an environmentally friendly, sustainable type person, but I just, something about that environment just really left me like wanting more. And it was like, why am I optimizing the supply chain of these, cheap consumer goods, disposable diapers and water bottles and tchotchkes and things? And for some reason, I just got this idea in my head that I should work in the end of the supply chain, which is the point of disposal, once we throw it away. And I had this great idea, like, let's just work backwards, because I'm going to show businesses like how much they're wasting, and they're going to be like, this is the greatest thing in the world. Let's change our practices to save money and save the world or whatever. Obviously, I shouldn't say obvious, but it's not that easy. And even making that determination in end of 2012, beginning of 2013, I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life, but I want to be part of like reducing our impact on the environment in some way. So making a supply chain that I believe in more sustainable would be a way to do that. So that's what really got me started in the journey. And since 2013, I've had different jobs and roles related to auditing to see what's in trash bins, providing education and outreach, doing waste characterizations where we sort through physical samples of trash, and leading up to about a year and a half ago, me starting Zero Waste Pro and basically forging my own path to work with cities and waste haulers and clients to help them reduce waste. But it's really, I think we want, like a lot of people want quick get rich quick schemes or quick fixes, or you want to lose weight and I want to lose 20 pounds before the summer, and you're like, well, it takes a lot more effort than just dieting for a short term, right? Like building a career, building a business. It's taken years and years and years of overcoming my own obstacles and things to get to where I am today, and it's still not where I wanted to be. I want to have more of an impact and make more of a difference and make more money. But it's definitely been a journey.
Yeah, and it's amazing because like we were saying, anybody who wants to get in and be a business owner, I think it's been kind of glamorized in the last decade or so, and it kind of goes through waves. But over the last kind of decades with the social media and everything, there's a lot of people who want to be entrepreneurs, and that's great, right? Gary Vee, whatever, people inspired, and not really realizing what kind of a grind it really is, and more than just people, the hustle and this and that, but really being able to get back up after you fall. And like you said, it's not a get rich quick scheme, and but I'm always fascinated as well how people kind of get into entrepreneurship, and to me it's fascinating that it was kind of always there with you, and your dad and your grandfather, and the jokes about the used whatever, the used schmata store, and it's just like everybody's kind of a classic way, right, of immigrating into the United States and having to do something, right? And then kind of how that's passed down. But then more recent generations like, no, you got to go get an education, right? And this was kind of the thing, or you got to go get a stable job, and you kind of did that. And yet you saw a need for something, right? You saw like a problem, and was kind of like the catalyst for you, more so than just like wanting to be a business owner, right? It was just kind of like you saw a problem that you were passionate about, and that kind of like led you to doing what you're doing in that sense. And you mentioned like zero waste, and zero waste, I think, like isn't necessarily a term we use so often. We hear about like recycling and sustainability or conservation. Like, talk to me specifically about what is zero waste, for the uninitiated in that regard, and how does that differ from maybe the more common terms that we're used to in society?
Sure. No, it's a good question. Zero waste. I mean, if you take it literally, it would be like not producing any trash. But like, as there's an organization called the Zero Waste International Alliance, which does a lot of advocacy around the world related to kind of normalizing sustainability and waste reduction practices. And it's really, if you think about like nature, like we talk about it now like a circular economy, where we make sure that everything we manufacture and produce at the end of its life cycle can be ethically and sustainably recycled or repurposed or disposed of in a way that like minimizes impact on the environment. And like, if you think about like nature, in the world of like mass produced agriculture, or living in a city or urban environment, we have landscapers and we have scientists, and we try to control nature. But out in wilderness, a tree grows, leaves fall off the tree, they sit on the ground, and then over time they break down because microbial activity, the worms and the insects and the animals are aerating the soil, they're chomping, they're stomping, they're stepping on things, and then it creates like a natural cycle. So like in nature, everything that is grown, once it's no longer needed, it falls off, it dies, and then it goes back into the earth. So if you look at it as it relates to zero waste for the human world, it's like, how do we just how do we harvest our resources in a way that doesn't deplete them and make sure that we have minimal impact to the environment? Well, then, at the end of the life, we can actually take those resources back. So you see things like all the disposable vapes that people use these days. It has a little thing on it saying, like a little trash can with a slash through it saying like, don't throw it away. But then there's no actual way to recycle it or dispose of it properly. So what do we end up doing? Most people probably just throw them in the trash, or they put them in a drawer. And or like anything with a power plug needs to be processed in a proper way, because they have precious metals and chemicals and lithium ion in them and stuff like that. So that's really zero waste, is like trying to figure out, well, if we're gonna use vapes, how do we make sure that they get disposed of properly? That's like, I think, one of the most ubiquitous and common things I think of that's like is a problem. Most people with cell phones now, most manufacturers, if you use like an iPhone or a Samsung or something, will take it back and either refurbish it or actually recycle it properly. Not because they care about the environment as much as they, precious metals are hard to come by these.
Yeah, they save a lot of money, right? I mean, they sell it for $1,500 or whatever. They save a
Yeah,
lot, to getting it back, and then being able to use those same a lot of the same material and turn right back around and put new parts, whatever needs to be fixed, and sell it for the fifteen hundred
yeah,
bucks. It's like taking apart the motorcycle you're doing for the parts and all that
yeah,
stuff, right?
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I guess it was funny because when I first saw where you were doing, I thought of like Tony Soprano, right, with waste management, and he's like, here's this like mafia guy, and oh, what do you do? Oh, I'm in waste management. It's kind of like wink, wink, kind of nudge, nudge thing where it's like, oh, it's like a scam and whatever. I do this other stuff on the really, but it's a joke, right? So I think like honest, I hear people talking about like recycling is a scam or it all goes to the same place anyways, or whatever. Give me a little bit of clarity on how really waste collection and recycling, how it actually works.
Yeah,
And I guess in terms of that public, private, and partnership triangle, I guess, what does
yeah.
that look
So
like?
I can only speak to, I mean, California specifically is where I do the majority of my work, but the United States in general and the Western world in general, it does, I say generally speaking, because other parts of the world handle their waste in different ways. Like, for example, I don't know how Israel handles it, but being a small country, I'd imagine that it's probably regulated pretty heavily. But in America and a lot of the Western world, we relied very heavily. Like I'm an elder millennial,
Mm.
just like you look like you might be in the similar range as me.
Turning
And I grew up
39
like,
tonight, baby. Turning 39 tonight.
hey,
So
a happy birthday. For the record,
thank you.
I want to be the
Thank you.
first person to wish you happy birthday. Just kidding. So I'm 40, and I grew up with curbside recycling, which was not a thing for a lot of people. Which means that like every week at my, they take the garbage company takes out the trash. They also take out separate container for recycling or for the yard waste and sometimes even food waste. Um, but most of us in America, at least, it turned out the U.S. was relying very heavily on China to take
Mm.
our recycling exports and
Like everything else, right?
like everything else, right? So we would ship all kinds of material to China and consider it recycled. So a lot of people in their mid to late 30s, early 40s, who grew up their entire lives recycling, I don't say they're fed a lie, but we relied very heavily on foreign markets to take in the material. And to put into perspective, where I live, like in Southern California, the city council in the city where I live, they were selling curbside recycling. So you throw it in the blue bin,
Mm.
and a company would pay them $30 to $40 a ton to separate the material and then market it. Meaning they would find the markets in the U.S., overseas, and they would pay them $40 a ton for it. 2017, end of 2017, China
They pay
was
thirty
changing.
dollars and then sell it for a $10 profit for 40. Is that what I heard?
No, I'm sorry. So like the city where I live would sell the curbside blue bin recycling to a
Mm.
company that would then do all the work. They would
Yeah.
separate it. They would they call it marketing it. They'd find buyers for it. Sometimes the buyers would be in the U.S. Sometimes they'd be in overseas. But they would sell it. They would sell it to this company for anywhere 30, 40, $50 a ton, just depending on the market. Well,
Copy.
as it turned out, the way we do waste management in California, at least, is as long as we're not incinerating it or putting it in a California landfill, we consider it like diversion. We're diverting it from a landfill. We didn't necessarily care what was happening to it. So we ship it over to China. And I mean, I don't know we really don't know what they're doing with it. They were probably doing some sort of secondary sorting where they had human beings picking through it to try to get the highest value items. They might have been incinerating, creating energy with some of it, and they might have been landfilling some of it. We really don't know. But in 2017, they completely changed their policies and they dramatically reduced the amount of material that they were willing to accept. I think
Wow.
the reality is they probably used our Western trash to build up their own recycling and processing infrastructure. And when they didn't need it anymore, they just said, okay, we're not going to take it. So like end of
Really?
2017, what ended up happening is all of a sudden it turned out like 2/3 of all of our recycling was being shipped to China. And now all of a sudden, barely any of it's getting shipped to China. And now we're stuck with it. So what that ended up doing is like cities like where I live, instead of being able to charge, instead of being able to sell the recycling for $30, $40, $50 a ton, now they're paying about $70 a ton to have it processed. What that, from the just the consumer perspective, what it means is it costs a lot more for your recycling and stuff to be processed, because before the city was selling it, making money. Now it went from being a revenue generator to a cost center. Wow. And it turned out that we were just taking for granted that you threw it in a blue bin and it disappeared and the city was making money. So we didn't really spend time thinking about, well, what's actually recyclable. So a lot of like little pieces of plastic packaging, different types of packaging like polystyrene, we know it as like styrofoam. Those items that are in theory are recyclable, well, it's a market-driven environment. So if we're not able to make money selling it, or we don't have the equipment to recover it, then it's not going to get recovered. So it's not a myth. It's not a lie. Recycling is still a very important part of the waste management infrastructure. It's just probably not as an efficient or effective of a process as we once thought. Because if you could just sell your trash, sell your recycling mixed with some trash, and you get paid for it, you're like, oh, they're going to take my trash with the recycling, then we're not going to make an effort to take that material out of it. So we're limited. Recycling is limited to the capabilities of the company or companies that are processing the material. It's there's a lot of technology now, but there's still lots of human intervention. So human beings that are on conveyor belts on essentially like a processing line, and they're watching raw bags of recycling come across, and they're literally physically looking for items like plastic bags that are going to get caught in the conveyor belts and then clog them and break them. They're looking for hazardous waste that shouldn't be running across the line. They're physically picking these items off the line. Some facilities use more technology than others, but there's just common sense says if you're putting your recycling mixed with all these other materials and it's running across conveyor belts that can process several tons, some 15 tons, some can process 50, 60, 70 tons an hour of material, they're not going to be able to get every little tchotchke that you put across the line. So that's a big limitation. And then it's market driven. Recycling, you have to find a way to recover the material, then you have to process it down into like pellets or thread or some fluff, some sort of material that can then be used to be remanufactured into something else. And a lot of brands, crude oil is still like very, very inexpensive to extract. And it's a very reliable, consistent feedstock for consumer goods. And if you're like a big manufacturer of some sort of a product, do you want to buy, we call it virgin plastic? Do you want to buy a virgin feedstock that is going to meet like a very strict standard for performance and for appearance? Or do you want to buy the recycled content that maybe has contamination mixed in it, so it could like maybe look discolored or reblemished? I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm just providing this as the feedback, right?
Yeah.
So there's like lots of competing factors that go against that work against recycling. So I think that it's an important part of the waste management infrastructure, but I think that most of us, specifically in California and the US, we took for granted that we threw the material in a blue bin and then it got recovered, it disappeared, it went away. The joke is, where is away, right? It went away, and then we get to consider it recycled.
No, and I mean that is fascinating, because I think a lot of well-intentioned people, they just are like, when in doubt, just recycle it, right? And they're putting probably a lot of trash in there, and they're like feeling good, like, oh, I'm filling up that blue bin every week, and it's like a lot of the stuff is getting sorted and put into the trash anyways. Or like you said, we're shipping it over and most of that stuff wasn't even recyclable either, or there wasn't a market for it. I think, I'm not sure. Most of us, maybe some of us have been in that place where, we're in college and, you're saving all your beer cans or whatever, your beer bottles, and, you're stacking up the whole place, and the place is starting to smell a little bit, and you're like, I better take the stuff out, or go recycle this thing. You think, oh, I'm going to go to the place and put in the bottles one by one or whatever. Mm-hmm. And you realize pretty quickly that they don't take that much actual stuff, right? Like there's a lot of bottles that you think would be recycled that are plastic, and for whatever reason they don't qualify under the thing, and they may have another bin there to kind of help you get rid of it. But it just, as you were speaking, kind of brought up that kind of memory, or where people maybe they want to donate clothes, and they think, hey, I'm helping, so they donate to the Chabad or whatever the thrift store or whatever, and most of that stuff is getting thrown out because it can only really keep the good stuff,
Yeah, so
and
sorry, it really brought something up with me because
yeah.
I'm trying to be because we obviously in Southern California and I live 2 miles, a few kilometers from like the worst wildfire in the Altadena wildfire, right? Between Altadena and Pacific Palisades, these are like two of the worst natural disasters probably that have ever happened, right? And they happened at the same time in the same region. So I try to be very sensitive to how I speak about it. But a lot of people were very outspoken that they're doing all these clothing drives and people were donating dirty clothes. They're donating like used underwear and worn out stuff. And I haven't spoken about it because, like I said, I'm trying to be like very respectful because I personally know a lot of people who lost their homes, and then I know lots of friends, and just it's hard to really comprehend just the amount of destruction. But that is, like as you said, that has been happening for years. That in a lot of ways we donate clothing to make us feel good about throwing away our stuff that we don't want anymore. When the reality is that I've heard that upwards of like 60% of what gets donated at like a Goodwill or one of those donation centers goes right into the trash because it could literally be, it's from a practical standpoint, it could be like, oh, well, this is like not in very good condition, right? If it's in such disrepair that you cannot wear it anymore, you can't donate it. But there's also sometimes someone might, they might donate something, this is like, someone's bar mitzvah t-shirt from 20 years ago and they don't want it anymore. And like, well, is someone really gonna want to buy this shirt from the Goodwill, or the racing shirt from the LA Marathon 2013? Is someone going to want to buy this athletic shirt or something, right? So a lot of it's just, we got to get really realistic about what we're doing, right? What we're throwing away. And I'm, sometimes we donate to feel good about buying more, when reality is, use it up. If we're the saying, use it up, wear it out. And oh my gosh, otherwise, you can, if you don't need it, right, just do without it, right? But you really should be using it until there's no more life left in it, whatever it is. Sorry, a little bit of a side tangent.
No, I mean, and I heard, unfortunately, I'm from LA, obviously born and raised, and lived there almost 30 years of my life. And yeah, one of the things, also have friends lost everything there, and definitely devastating. I mean, they had to tell the people, like, stop bringing clothes, stop, like, we have enough clothes. Thank you very much. Bring food, like, donate money, do something that, like, is tangible for people to be able to use now, And
yeah, for sure.
And of course, it's hard. My parents actually had a house fire, not associated with any of the fires, once before, and I remember just how devastating it was to like just have even the smoke damage, right, on stuff that didn't actually get burned and up in flames, and it's just like you have to throw all this stuff out that, and I think it brings up, kind of what you're saying, and it kind of goes back to your dad's business with the storage, that people don't really want to throw stuff away. They'd rather just like feel, they have attachment, and really it's like hoarding and these kind of things are associated with anxiety, right? You get anxiety of putting stuff away, and it's like a way of like coping with whatever loss or whatever else is going on, or in your life, and it's that's kind of like the bigger issue, right? And the same thing, I guess, with recycling, where we like want to be helping, but then when the city was making money, it seemed like they're just accepting everything, right? And now they themselves are also like, no, we got to process all this stuff. It's not the same thing. We're losing money now, and it's just something that we have to address, right, in that regard. So I guess that kind of brings us to how that the level that money plays into the whole process, right? And obviously, if we're motivated by one thing, especially businesses, it's money, making money, saving money, right? So how does like the waste industry actually make money from this? You mentioned a little bit about how they're losing money, and you mentioned about how they were making money and they shipped it to China, but like, where are we now with that, if at all? And like, how can business owners save on trash and their disposal and everything?
Yeah, so I guess you brought up the public-private partnership, and I'll talk about that first. It's really like a self-aggrandizing, self-fulfilling, like negative prophecy outcome. When cities collect trash, like the city employees, they provide the trash collection service. It's almost like a nonprofit business because they can only charge the cost of service because they're not allowed to make a profit off of their constituents. So, like,
Yeah.
for example, in the city of LA, for example, the residential single family homes, the city employees collect trash there. So it's like assessed through different means than like apartment buildings and private companies. So in theory, they're charging the actual cost of the service to collect trash, recycling, and organic recycling, yard waste, compost. But then for the commercial sector, which also includes any type of multifamily apartment building with 5 or more units, for some reason, the state decided that if it's 5 or more units, it's considered a commercial property or something for the purpose of trash collection. They outsourced it to private companies. So this doesn't show up on most trash bills, but for every dollar that a private business or a apartment building pays for trash service to a private company, anywhere between 15 and 20 cents gets transmitted to the city, and they call them franchise fees. So you figure, I can't speak to every state or every part of the world, but at least in California, they're very common. And statewide, it's anywhere between like 5 and 25% of the cost of that a typical business or apartment pays for trash service, 5 to 25%. I would say, the low end to the high end, but anywhere 15 to 20% is pretty standard, goes directly to the city to cover, pay, they call them franchise fees, which is essentially they're paying for the right to have access to these businesses. And then we have all these requirements, and it all rolls up to the state. So the waste hauling companies and the processors, the facilities that recover all the recycling or compost all the organics, they have to meet minimum requirements that are self-reported. Sure, they can get audited, but a lot of these companies you're talking about I wouldn't say mafia. You talked about like the Sopranos and stuff, but right, they're vertically integrated, and they have to meet the minimum requirements to keep their contracts. So it creates an environment where they're going to do whatever they can to make sure that they are meeting the requirements. And then if you're a public works director and you're stressed out and you're really busy and you're getting these checks for hundreds of thousands, or depending on the size of the city, millions of dollars a year in franchise fees, or truck driving by or something. So if you're a public works director and you're making anywhere hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars a year in franchise fees, and your service providers are telling you they're reporting they're meeting the minimum requirements, and then you get to report up to the state of California that you're meeting the minimum requirements, it ends up creating almost the whole system is like a conflict of interest, because if the city's really, I don't know why it's busy emergency vehicle season right now. Yeah, so it's like a negative feedback loop. The cities get to make their franchise fees, which help fund their programs, because if you're a public works department, you lose money on everything, whether you're doing street sweeping, other services, you're maintaining power lines, whatever it is, right? Those are all cost centers. And then for some reason, we let private companies collect the trash and pay a service fee to do it. So if we actually embraced all of the state's goals of reducing waste, then the public works departments would make a lot less money, and the private for-profit waste haulers would also make a lot less money and essentially put themselves out of business. So there's definitely like a built-in conflict of interest. And what it looks like for the typical business owner is, from my experience, I've visited a lot of businesses on behalf of waste haulers and behalf of cities. I've overseen or supervised team members visiting lots of businesses, and most of them don't have the correct level of trash service, and they don't really understand what they need, or they view it as a utility, like electricity or water. Well, with electricity, it's really easy. And I'm sorry getting in the weeds. Sometimes I feel like I get in the weeds about this stuff.
No, it's great. I mean, listen, if you can save someone money, business owners listening to this, I think it's good,
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is, if I make the analogy like a utility, is people, like with electricity, it's very easy. You install double pane windows, you can put in energy efficient heating and air or appliances and things. And then, somebody in the corporate office can just look at their dashboard and they can see, oh, we're spending less money on electricity, so we're doing great. When it comes to trash, there's a lot of stakeholders involved. If it's a commercial property manager, they have different tenants. The tenants have their own customers. They might have a third party that takes, janitorial service that takes out the trash. They have to negotiate with a private waste hauler to provide the right amount of service. So there's lots of, and then of course there's the issue of like what actually goes in the recycle bin and what actually goes in the organics bin. So there's lots of stakeholders involved. And I think what I like to, my invitation to the typical business owner or person that is paying the trash bill is just like look across your entire portfolio. Ideally, if it's one business and they're spending $500, $1,000 a month, making some changes, they may not see necessarily in their mind, they don't see the value. But my bread and butter is working with the businesses that have 40 locations, 50, 100 locations. And we're like, okay, let's just take a step back and look at, and it takes a little work, but just actually figure out what are you throwing away? And are there opportunities to just like replace disposable or recyclable items with reusable or more durable items? And then just look at the service you're subscribed to. For whatever reason, most businesses look at it as like a utility, and the waste hauler says, you need this much of this, you need this, this, and this. And they go, okay. And they don't really question, okay, well, if I were to increase the recycling and reduce the trash, could I get save money on the bill? If I'm a grocery store and I donate food to local, a local food bank or a church or something, could I then reduce my trash service? Yes, usually you can do all those things. A lot of them don't really know how to negotiate. And I feel like I'm almost like if like the guy who used to work for the IRS, the tax department for the federal government, and then retires and opens up their own CPA firm. They go, I know how the IRS makes all the money, so I'm going to help you save the money. I feel like that's how I am with the trash business. I know everything they do, and the biggest thing they do is they kind of bully their way into telling people this is the way it is, and there's nothing you can do about it. And maybe that's a little bit of a legacy, kind of stereotypical, like strongman, tough guy, mafiosa kind of thing. But the reality is,
shake you down for your trash, buddy. You're going to pay this bill whether you like it or not.
No, there's truth to it. You call up your waste hauling company and try and tell them you say, hey, I noticed you're supposed to pick up my dumpster. You didn't pick it up. And they'll be like, oh, a car was blocking it. And then it'd be like their default is to provide, it's kind of like any other utility, right? Their default is to provide bad customer service, hoping that you go away. But if you're a business with 40, 50 locations, and there's probably an opportunity just to reconfigure your service, to move things around, to adjust the size of the containers or the frequency of the collection to save your business money without actually having your operations, your employees or customers do anything different. And when you start amplifying a savings of $500 or $1,000 a month across 40 or 50 locations, it ends up being a lot of money. I am an environmentalist is what got me into this industry, but I don't ever mention climate change. I don't mention global warming because it's too hard for most people to understand. It's like, these are like existential crises, crises like death. Like, I know I'm going to die someday, but it's not for a really long time. So I'll worry about it when it's a problem, right? It's like, okay, well, I want to eat healthy and take care of myself to live as long as possible, right? I don't want to necessarily take that approach, but a lot of people look at that, they kind of take that same philosophy. So I don't even bother with global warming, climate change, any of that stuff. It's just like, hey, like it's good for the bottom line to be sustainable. It's good for the bottom line to go into your supply chain, to look through your entire supply chain and root the waste out from it. And it's good for your bottom line to optimize your trash service. And as an added benefit, it's going to make you, if it's good for the bottom line, it's going to make you more competitive, which means you can either have a higher profit margin, or you can charge your customers a lower price. And either way, you're benefiting everybody. So that's how I try to kind of approach these things.
I think that's great, honestly, because for better or for worse, we're always losing people, when we're using things that have become politicized on one side of the aisle or the other, right? Certain things, so I even had a gentleman on Arlen Wasserman here not too long ago, and he was like one of the OGs of sustainability before it was even like a thing. Like in the 70s, he was created this position, this thing at his school, whatever, about sustainability, and he's kind of lived his whole life on that, and I was like, why does it have to be to your point, right? Why does it have to be global climate change anyways? I think that kind of thing, automatically you're going to just be alienating certain people. And like you said, it's just, even if you're not politically, it's got people's heads spinning already, right? And it's just putting in a way that provides value for somebody now. and in a way that that is not just something far off and scaring people or whatever.
Yeah.
People smoke cigarettes, and any kinds of things or whatever else, and just in that way, I think, and I think just in general, all these kinds of everything under this kind of umbrella for whatever reason is kind of been put into that category, right? And
Yeah.
and it's almost like I was in cannabis for many years. Not try to share that on the podcast and everything. And cannabis used to be pot, weed, and then they had a whole marketing change, branding change. It's cannabis, and it's like medicinal, and it's like helping people and all these kind of things, and then you can kind of like get back in, and they've changed their whole mentality around it, right? And is that kind of I posed a question for him, and he was like, no, we need but I'll pose a question for you. Is there like a marketing problem with this whole recycling and sustainability, and even without getting into climate change, which for sure I think many people have a problem with? Is there like you've seen that it's
Yeah.
become like a partisan issue as opposed to just, and how can we, like, I guess from your point of view, is this something that you feel needs to kind of be remarketed and kind of rebranded a little bit?
Yes. My vision for the world is that we integrate sustainable practices into everyday business, because sustainable practices means the business is eliminating waste from their supply chains. A really quick example before I get into the real answer of your question, like maybe 15 years ago, 10 years ago, In-N-Out Burger used to serve everything in a disposable container, ate it in the restaurant or took it to go. They put it in that little folding cardboard, paperboard thing. And then like 10, 15 years ago, they started using those reusable plastic trays. And I guarantee you, they're very conservative. If the government says to do it, they try to do the opposite. But I guarantee you, they crunch the numbers and they're like, we're spending $1 zillion buying trays that people use for 10 minutes and they throw it in the trash. The trays are bulky, so we're spending zillions of dollars on extra trash service because we're throwing them away. And we're spending $1 zillion having our employees have to physically pop these things open just to be used for 10 minutes. So I guarantee you, somebody sat there and crunched the numbers and said, we're going to use these reusable trays. We're going to save a ton of time buying inventory. We're going to save a ton of time a ton of money on trash. We're going to save money on this and that and everything. And they're also, they're saving money on the bottom line, but they're also doing the right thing for the environment. So that's what I have to say about that, right? But they're not going to advertise it because it's like, for whatever reason, we've made like environmentally friendly is like we've made this perception that it's bad for business or something. But the biggest issue I have,
that's going to cost money. I think that's kind of the thing, is going to cost money, and imposing kind of laws, I think, takes away from businesses' ability to have a more free market than it is, right? Like less laws, less government. So it's kind of been put in this thing like, oh, they're trying to push this thing on us, the government, big government, and big trash and all these kind of things. And I think that's kind of the perception. I think that's part of the perception.
Yeah, so there's like, I get mad at everyone for this. So the left, my entire life, and now that I know that, I'm only a year older than you, our entire lives, we're running out of oil. We got to stop producing oil. We got to conserve gas. We're running out of oil. And now the U.S. is the largest producer of oil in the world, apparently. So drill, baby, drill, as Trump says, right? We're producing more oil than we ever have. So that the alarmism that, oh, we got to stop. It's bad, right? It's like, well, from a regular person's standpoint, well, we're producing more than we ever have. It seems to be a never-ending supply. And we've been sounding the bell. We've been raising alarm about climate change, and it's like the world is going to end. It's going to collapse. There's going to be a hole in the ozone layer, and we're just all just going to be vapor in like 1 second. And that may be true, but it doesn't resonate or land with most people. And then on the opposite side, the far right side of the spectrum, it's like they'll implement these practices if it saves them money, but they don't want to brag about it or advertise about it because being environmentally friendly is bad for business. So I don't understand what the holdup is, but that's really where I come at. I try to take, especially now, like the federal government is not, like, it's cut off the funding for U.S. aid. It's cut off the funding for a lot of federal EPA programs that build up waste and recycling infrastructure. through executive order. Whether that'll last long term or not is to be seen. But like now is more than ever is the time to find those market-based solutions where we can validate and prove that doing the right thing for related to your trash through the products that you use or you manufacture, the recyclability, just rooting out waste in the supply chain. If we can make a market case, then it doesn't matter what's happening, if there's government money or not, if there's grant money or not. It doesn't matter which political party's in power. So that's where I kind of look at it. That's my perspective on it.
Yeah, for sure. And not to take it too sideways, you mentioned the oil and everything, and I think whether science of it and aside and everything, I think just in general, we know that scarcity or the idea of scarcity rises the price of things, right? So if there's scarcity in something, just like in terms of diamonds, right? There may be so many diamonds, but if you've got diamonds locked up somewhere and you're just saying like, these are the amount of diamonds that are out there and we're just going to release a certain amount every year, right? And so that'll increase the scarcity. So now people won't know that it's just rocks that you can go and they're no more valuable than any cubic zirconium or anything like that, right? And so now we can charge what we want. And I think that's kind of plays a role in the oil as well, right? Where it's like, regardless of how much oil there is or isn't, there's been this, kind of thing that there's scarcity, and not only that, and then on the other side, it's like, well, also there's, it's doing a number on the environment, everything, right? And then what's the answer been? To create electric vehicles, and this is what the whole investment has been, to create electric vehicles, right? And we're just learning that not only are they not operating on the same level as combustible vehicles, right, but they're also adding to another kind of pollution and modern slavery and all kinds of different things, problems with where they're coming from. People don't want to know where your cobalt batteries are actually coming from. And in the meantime, there have been so many different examples of vehicles that are running on other products that can't be artificially made to be scarce, right? Water, different kinds of oils, and somehow those end up either getting bought, the patents get bought and thrown into the trash, or the person who invented them end up somehow not wanting to live anymore, supposedly, and so that's the real issue, right? It's like that both sides, it's like they both want to make money and they want to do away with anything that's going to prevent them from making money. And, not to get too much, like I said, sideways, but I think the same thing with waste. That I think both sides just want to make money, and if people were just to have a more kind of zero waste or less waste kind of mentality, just bring your reusable kind of camping stuff when you go camping, stuff like that. It's like you get to save money, and you're satisfying both sides of the aisle on that,
Yeah, we look. Sorry to cut you off. We look at it from the wrong perspective. Like I see most businesses, most people, they get really upset. They go, "You're telling me this isn't recyclable anymore. So what can I buy that's compostable instead?" And then you have all these companies selling certified compostable stuff. And then I go to the compost facilities that process material, and there's not a single, at least in California, there's not a single facility that actually willingly accepts compostable bioplastics, because for a lot of reasons, but there's no nutrients in them. They don't know if it's plant-based plastic or oil-based plastic. It's just like a filler. It's a filler, but it's also like it's not a substitute for just conserving resources. It's just going from one disposable single-use item to another. And that's where we really just need to start rethinking just our relationship with stuff. Someone I know reached out to me and says, I have 750,000 compostable straws that I don't know what to do with. Do you have a way to get rid of them? And it's like, well, 750,000 straws. Like even a high volume business, even a chain, even an In-N-Out burger. I mean, how long is it going to take them to go through 750,000 straws? Not that they would take compostable straws anyway. No one likes compostable straws, but I digress.
No, I don't know where that can. That was a bad move and a bad look, I think, overall in the whole thing, and that becomes like a talking point. It's like when a person's like, talking about, oh, the government doesn't have your back, and people are like, oh, what are you, conspiracy theorists? What, you think you believe in flat Earth? And that the flat earthers are ruining it for all the people who are like, listen, I don't think the politicians actually have your back, and it's the same kind of thing, the compostable straws are killing it for the people who are like, listen, maybe a little bit we should like think about not having so much waste or something. Like maybe that should be like a thought that we have, and be like, what do you want me to do? You want me to have those straws?
Well, I think it's important to have a healthy skepticism of the status quo, whether it's government or a system, because I'm not, I try not to get too much into conspiracy theories, but like I explained with the public-private partnership, this is not a conspiracy. It's just common sense tells you that if for every $100 a waste hauler charges, they send 20 of it to a city, and the city is making hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars a year for the public works department that otherwise loses money left and right from all other aspects of their operation, then you could see why there would be a fundamental conflict of interest that would prevent them from really wholeheartedly embracing waste reduction strategies, right? So I don't think that's a conspiracy. I think it's just like a common sense kind of thing. But if I were to say present that to a broad audience, they would probably say that I'm being a conspiracy theorist. But
that's the whole thing.
The cost to process waste has tripled in the last 10 years in California, and yet the amount we have diverted from landfills has gone down. So clearly what we're doing is not working. Now, I'm a big advocate of reducing waste to landfill and reducing greenhouse gas emissions and conserving resources. I'm just telling you the way we're doing it isn't working. But I can also tell you that that's a very unpopular thing to say amongst the people, people in my circles, right? So, but I'm still going to keep fighting and advocating for it because it's what I absolutely believe in. We're wasting money, feeling good, but not actually really achieving the results that we're hoping for.
Yeah. I mean, the problem with people on the left and people on the right is that they think that they're on the left and then they're right, and they just want to be left and right instead of just like, oh, maybe I'm this on this issue and this on this issue because I'm actually thinking for myself, And so when you just like identify as a this or a that, then you listen to all the talking points and you become like emotionally and egotistically committed to that, and that thing has to be right because it's associated with your worldview now, right? So now you're not seeing, you're looking at the same pen and you're looking at it from different angles and you're just making stuff up about the pen because this is what you're told today. It's like, so I appreciate, bringing like this real honest kind of perspective that I think is refreshing, where it's like, listen, I'm just thinking about it. It has nothing to do with me. People arguing with me on this on both sides. I'm just trying to be, help a little bit less on the emissions and all this kind of stuff. So
it's conserving resources is good for the environment, but it's also good for us because it's cheaper, right? Consuming, like you said, scarcity causes the price of things to go up. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. We get so, like you said, so polarized. We're so much into identity politics right now, exacerbated by social media and different factors. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter black, white, Jewish, Christian, atheist. We want to have a safe place to live. We want to have food on the table. We want clean water. We want our kids to be safe and to grow up and be educated and everything else. And it doesn't matter what our religious beliefs or political beliefs are. We all want the same thing. And yet we've allowed, kind of these extreme narratives to really take over and cause way more harm than good in a lot of ways. So
I agree wholeheartedly on that. And in terms of, you mentioned there, one of the positives, right, is about how you're helping business save money and make money. You work with all three of those sectors, right? The private, public, you work with the kind of the people getting rid of the waste and the people who are getting charged to get rid of the waste. So you kind of know those ins and outs, like you said, and helping industries make money and helping businesses save money, right, in that regard. And, same kind of thing, like you said, somebody who worked for the IRS and then going and becoming a consultant to businesses and saying, hey, this is how you can save money on taxes. There's a big advantage to people who will go and seek those kind of services. So I think you're doing a great service in that regard for businesses to go and reach out to you. I guess what kind of strategies are you using to kind of find those businesses, and let them know that, hey, I can save you a lot of money? What kind of strategies are you employing in that regard in this time?
Yeah, no, it's so I got to tell you that it's a lot easier for me to sell what I'm doing to city governments and waste hauling companies, because we have really strict like compliance standards and regulations in California that drive the business. From the private sector, it's definitely it's more challenging, because you really got to make that market based pitch. And I found there's a disconnect from oftentimes there's a disconnect between what the corporate office thinks or is doing and what the actual facilities people, the third party janitors or whoever it is, are actually doing in the field. So I'm actually still trying to unlock the best way to really penetrate the business world. But I think it's
So
just
you're saying
providing
like maybe at the top they don't think it's an issue, but the people at the bottom they realize it's an issue, or the other way around?
I think that, so from my experience working with like grocery chains, for example, it's the corporate office gets 30, 40, 50 invoices for trash at all their locations every month. And one location might be $5,000 and one is $7,000 and one is $15,000. And they don't really understand why the price is different. They might know there's a problem, but I don't think they really understand what to do about it, or that there's something they can do about it. They get 50 invoices for trash a month, and they write 50 checks a month. And it could end up being, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And, that's where I bring the value, is like saying, just bring the transparency to that. And I really think that true transparency in the waste industry is the only way we're really going to drive the change. There's way too much opacity. They don't want you to know. No one wants you to know what's actually happening, because if we knew what was happening, then you could say, okay, well, this is not actually recyclable. I need to stop using it. Or the city, if most people realized that, especially people that own businesses that tend to skew more conservative, they realize that 20% of what they were paying to waste management was immediately being sent over to the city where their business is located, they'd probably be horrified that they're essentially paying a tax without really realizing that they're doing it, right? So I think that there's just like a lot of misinformation and a lot of confusion, and there's a lot of people that really, they go, trash is a cost of doing business, just like electricity is, or water is, or gas is, and they don't really think about ways in which they can adjust it or reduce it or negotiate it to save money while also doing the right thing for their employees and the environment.
Yeah. And growing up in LA and now living in Israel, I realize how little anybody has in the United States about negotiating, especially in these kind of things. People just are like, "What's the price? Fine, here it is."
Yeah.
Budget in or make more money or whatever it is, but negotiating what I want to get in a confrontation for. They think it's like a confrontation or something, as opposed to like, what it's always been, right? It's always just been. So here it's like you have to, every single year, you have to cancel your insurance and say, I'm going over here. And they're like, okay, here, we'll give you. And otherwise, they're just raising the price. Same thing on your phone, you have to.
So it's really funny that I've done a lot of work, because LA is obviously, as you know, one of the most diverse cities in the world. And there's a lot of, to your point, I helped a waste hauler roll out a new program in downtown LA, which is also very diverse. And most people complained about the new program, but I swear to you, 99% of the Jewish-owned or Persian-owned businesses asked for a discount, asked what they could do to get the price down. And it was just pretty funny, because you're right. I think it's a cultural difference that depending on where in the world you're from, people have a much more sense of like haggling or negotiating. And it's really a lost art. And now that everything's digital and stuff, I feel like most people, especially young people, they do everything online. So they don't know what it's like to go to a car dealership and haggle with them to try and get a better rate on the car or the financing, or to get the extras thrown in. And it's pretty funny.
They think it's scary. And it's really, it is a lost art. And I'm grateful that, it's like the whole world is operating on one level, and the people who can kind of do it are able to kind of get ahead in major ways, in that regard, where we're just kind of like, and then people are like, oh, the Jews, they're always looking for a deal. And it's like, come on, like it's a cultural difference, like we just, why would you spend money that you don't need to spend? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And so thinking that maybe one culture has it better, or one generation has it better, or whatever else. There's always opportunities for every generation. Even for people who are, like, oh, look at the boomers. They got to buy their house for $20,000 and they're selling it for $1 million, or $1.5 million, and they got it in 1970, whatever, or 80, whatever. And it's like, I think they're going to be saying the same thing about people in 2020 and 2050 about people in 2025 who are like, oh my gosh, can you believe that Bitcoin was only $10,000 back then,
Only
and then
only
and
100,000
now it's
now.
2.5 million? Like, what,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
here we are thinking, oh, we missed the boat. We should have gone it back in 2012 or 2017 or whatever. It's like there's always something there, and I think that that's where you kind of come in here with what you're doing, is kind of being ahead of the curve, and thinking about it in a different kind of way, in that kind of respect. And you mentioned there as well, I'll let you, if you have something you want to say on that, that's well. But I want to also ask, you mentioned obviously, brought up kind of like the cultural difference, and, how Jews are the first ones to go in there. And I guess coming back there and, seeing kind of where your dad had his business and your grandfather had his business and all these kind of things, being raised with those kind of Jewish values, what kind of, not religious per se, whatever, like, how has Judaism really affected you, and how do you kind of integrate some of those values or anything else into your business and what you're doing?
So it's really, I've been having this reckoning lately because I'm actually what I call a cashew, which I only heard about 10 years ago, that term before. Catholic mother, Jewish father. And so I was raised Catholic, but I always celebrated Passover, Hanukkah. My grandmother was the president of her temple for several years, and then she stopped doing it, though, because she said it was too political. I think it's pretty funny. They both my dad's parents passed away several years ago now, but I always just love, and don't quiz me on it because I'm not going to be super well versed, but I always, like, Passover has always been my favorite holiday. And it was one that growing up, we would all go over to my grandparents' house or family members' house, and we had the big long table, and we would get the Haggadah, and we would, like, sing the songs and tell the story. And I've just always appreciated the tradition and the storytelling in the Jewish faith, and the it's like almost like the endurance, the resiliency of, like, a people that we don't want to forget the past, but we still want to continue to push forward in the future. And that's always just kind of, I hadn't really thought about it, but ever since, like, October 7th and, like, the political climate and the view of the Jewish people, like, forget about Israel, the view of Jewish people in America is like definitely changed. And it's just like a reminder, like, how important it is. I've just really been thinking about this a lot lately, so I guess the timing is good, right? It's just how important it is to remember just the history and the tradition, and the importance of protecting the Jewish people, because I realize that if we don't protect the Jewish people, then eventually there won't be a Jewish people. And I think it's just kind of, I don't know, just reminded me, just every situation I go into, everywhere, like we said earlier, there's so much polarization, so much politicization, and it's trying to find, we don't want to just blame an entire group of people for the actions of the government or the actions of a small fraction of them, or whatever the case may be. And it's just a reminder to, like, when I go into business, I've really learned that I never know what the person I'm interacting with, what they're going through, what their experience is, what their background is, and trying to find that common ground, that common bond, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you sharing that, because you shared this when we were doing pre-podcast meet and greet, and I was even like, hey, you know what? Like, we have a non-Jewish podcast too, and if you would have talked to me, probably, I myself, as I was telling you, I'm also a convert. My mom was born not Jewish. My dad was born not Jewish. My grandfather was Jewish, and my parents did a conservative conversion before I was born. And even if you would have asked me probably 10 years ago, hey, you know what, should just to let you know, blah blah, I may have been like, you know what, man, like, you're not Jewish, and I don't want you to be on the show. I wouldn't have said it like that, but, like, and I now realize that would have just been because of my own trauma of being told, hey, I'm not Jewish, and having to go through the Orthodox conversion myself, and my parents did it, and all these things, and it was more associated with that, more than, like, trying to be who am I to be a gatekeeper in anything, right? In the sense that we don't know who's really Jewish and not Jewish. If we want to get into it, and we're going down the line, there's a lot of Jews who don't know they're Jewish. A lot of people who had to hide their Judaism or were forced to convert, and a lot of people who are finding out that they were the whole time, or people who are making their way back, or people who have done the conversion and then realized, oh my gosh, like, and then my mom told me that I'm her mom, and then and all these kind of things. And that's aside from the fact that, okay, like, even before, right, we used to go with patrilineal, right? And you mentioned you had been on birthrights, but what really got me is how, you were talking about kind of, your name is Jonathan Levy, right? So obviously people think automatically, like, here's this Jew, and and you were telling me, hey, you know what, I've faced anti-Semitism and all these kind of things, and you're talking about October 7th and my plight, or how, how much it affected you. And I'm like, what else is there with the Jew, right, than a person who has such a caring heart, right, trying to do the right thing, and they are facing anti-Semitism, right? The creator is the person who sends the anti-Semitism to us, right? It's not the person. The person is just a stick in the creator's hand, right? And so if he was like, oh, this guy's not Jewish, he wouldn't send you anti-Semitism in the first place, and the way that you feel in your heart with other Jews, and feeling the pain that all of us felt on October 7th, and what can we do over here? And I think this is more indicative of anything. And that's why I was like, oh, you know what? Come on, and I'm not the gatekeeper here. I'm not telling people, like I said, if you would have told me a few years ago, I would have been like, no. And I remember I was on Birthright. When I came on Birthright, I was like, I had just finished my own conversion, right? I just finished my own conversion, and I had my own Orthodox conversion. I went on like a non-religious group for whatever reason, right? And I'm like the only dude keeping Shabbat and keeping kosher, and they accommodated me, and everything was fine in that regard. But I remember, like, we had like a meeting, everybody's introducing themselves, and there was like, a couple of people who kind of shared with me that they shared with the whole group, right? It was like an open thing. And looking back, I'm like embarrassed, right? They were like, oh, my dad's Jewish, my mom's Jewish. And I was like, you're not Jewish. Like, why are you saying that you're Jewish? You're not Jewish. And like all these things, just because I myself had been made to feel a certain way. And now I look back, I'm like, that wasn't right. Like, that wasn't, what is it? What am I going to, is that encouraging her to come closer or do anything in the first place? Like, what is that actually doing? No one ever came close to Torah or anything by getting beat by a stick, and it's just like, to me, it's like, we don't know who's anybody, right? Like, my mom had a convert, but her mom used to light candles in the closet and used to take challah, and we asked her, why did you do that? And it's like, I don't know, my mom did that, and they were from Spain and France, so it's like, we don't know what's going on, who's doing what anywhere else like that, and I appreciate you coming on and sharing your thing, right, and sharing your plight with the Jewish people, and feeling that pain and everything that goes on, and being raised with those values, and more will be revealed. That's the way I look at it. It's going to be Moshiach that comes, and it says Moshiach comes, he's going to smell a Jew. What is that? Why would the Gemara have to say that? Why would this be one of our traditions that implies that there's so many people don't know they're Jewish who are gonna be needed to be identified as real true Jews, right? There's like 10 lost tribes out there, and so many things, and so many people lost throughout the generations, and so that implies that there's just huge amount of numbers. It's gonna be that's what I think one of the jokes that God has on us. He's gonna be like, oh, you think, how many anti-Semites are actually Jewish? And they're going to be like, like, oh, BT dubs, you are a Jew,
That's funny.
And it's just like, God's got a lot of jokes. What's the point of having a twist if there's, this huge story, if there's no great reveal in the end? So, that's my long soliloquy for saying, I appreciate you and appreciate you sharing and coming on. And that doesn't take away my question, right? Like, what kind of values have you brought in from that kind of upbringing? And now that you've been fully transparent and everything, it's like you still were raised with certain things. You watched your dad, who, according to everybody, was 100% Jewish, and how he'd run businesses and what he was doing. And you mentioned Pesach and all different traditions. And so what kind of values of that do you hold so dear that you remember from your grandparents and everything like that, or maybe that you've integrated into your business or your life in general?
No, it's really, I keep on being amazed when I get to know people that I think I won't have something in common with, or I won't have anything to share with them. like my parents got married in 1977, Catholic mother, Jewish father. Mostly on my mom's side of the family, she was like told, "Don't do it. You're making a mistake." My dad has a memory of like one of his friend's moms saying that she felt sorry for him because he wasn't going to go to heaven because he was Jewish, not Catholic or whatever. And all the people who talked all the trash, right? None of them are here anymore, but yet my parents are still together. And it's been very weird because I've been to Israel and I had Orthodox people say, "Oh, your mother's not Jewish, so you're not Jewish." I've been to Portugal, which is where my mom's family's from, and I've had people be critical of me for not speaking Portuguese. And I just keep on realizing, even like you reached out to me because of my name, right? To a certain extent, making maybe not in a negative way, but just an assumption based on my name, that my Jewishness. And it's just interesting because I think I've been really striving to take this into any conversation I have with people. Sorry, they're taking the trash out right now. Of course, the absolute perfect timing.
Well, yeah,
to end the conversation,
especially for the topic. The waste management.
So 1 moment, please. And it makes lots of banging too. Oh my goodness! And then I'll have to hop off. My movie.
Oh yeah! Oh my goodness!
No,
I went over. Dude, we were at this. By the way, that's a great conversation. By the way, I don't know. Like I don't just go over the hour like normally. I don't normally like do that. I'm usually really good about and I just felt like just in general, you're really easy to talk to, and there's been stuff that I just for. It's like, how much can you talk about trash? I could have, like, if I wanted to, just, like, ran through it. And
I could talk to you all day about trash. But the person I was supposed to meet with texted asking if I could push it 30 minutes anyway. So I figured I'd let it go. But
cool.
To get back, to try, I guess, to wrap it up, because I got to leave in a minute, a few minutes here. But, like, I guess the really big takeaway for me is I feel like I keep on coming up against these situations where I realize that people are making judgments about me before they even get to know me. And it's interesting, right, to identify myself as like a secular Jewish American who's also Portuguese, and then to have experienced by my own people that I'm not actually Jewish, or not really doing a good enough job of protecting the Portuguese part of me. It's like pretty hurtful. And then I also realize that a lot of people, identify me as Jewish, whether they say something or not. I'm like the token Jewish friend to some people, and I'm not like actually technically like really Jewish in the way that I think you think I am, right? And I just keep on getting surprised by people that I meet that just like person, like just as I get to know somebody, like even the yoga instructor who works at Trader Joe's, and then we connected on Instagram, and he's also a musician, and I never would have known that by talking to him, or just by only interacting with him in the context of like taking a yoga class, right? I'm like, oh, wow, he actually is a composer of music, and he records it and he performs, and he's a really cool guy. But I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't have taken the time to actually get to know him. And it's just a reminder, right? To like, we never know who we're going to meet. We never know what opportunities are going to be unlocked. We never know where the support's going to come. In fact, I feel like I get a lot of support from like loose connections or people I don't even know, because they see me as an entrepreneur and they say, man, I wish I could do that. Or, I've had this idea that I want to cultivate. I think it's really cool that you're actually doing it, right? So that's really the takeaway. It's like, just, I don't know, just that's it right there. Just not judging a book by its cover, because, anti-Semitism is real. It seems to be active, stronger than it's ever been in my life in the U.S. right now. And it's a reminder, right, that just because, I don't know how I'm trying to put a bow on it right now, but figure out how to finish it. But really, it's just there's so much to learn from other people, and I think we share a lot more. We have a lot more in common with each other than we have in differences, and that's really it. And I think that when I take that attitude into the world reciprocates. When I'm looking for the common bonds, the ways that we are similar, when I'm looking at how I can help them solve their problems, and I don't make it political, I don't make it adversarial, then most people respond favorably.
Yeah. And I think, it's very unfortunate, having those experiences. And I've had those experiences myself as well, with facing not only anti-Semitism, but then the judgment from Jews and everything like that. And, we, not to bring Dinima and the Jewish people, God forbid, I think people are well-intentioned for the most part, and they're well-intentioned. They don't want to just walk around hurting people. They just want to protect the Torah and the Jewish people. And, we've been attacked by so many that sometimes we have to just circle the wagons. And we're definitely in that kind of stage right now, where there's just so much stuff going on in that regard. Like I said, it's, and like you said, right, there's more that binds us together than takes us apart, and your plight is with the Jewish people, and more will be revealed. So I guess, before I let you go, let our listeners know more about Zero Waste Pro, how they can get in touch with you, seek out your services, and how you can save them money in their businesses.
Yeah, just go to zerowastepro.com. And like I said at the top, I'm also the Zero Waste Guy. So you can go on Instagram and find Zero Waste Guy and connect with me there. I'm always happy to share knowledge. I think that there's enough opportunity to go around that I share information all the time, because if you think you can make it work without me, then go right ahead. But if you want help optimizing trash service across your portfolio, if you want help rooting out all the waste in your supply chain, oftentimes it helps having a fresh set of eyes taking a look at an existing problem. So that's where I come into play. So I really appreciate, Maynard, the opportunity to be on the show, and I wish you a happy birthday, of course.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you, and appreciate everybody else wherever you are. Check out Zero Waste Pro, Jonathan Levy here, and as well, we didn't even get into that. Part of your journey was that you were an influencer before you even kind of did this thing, and kind of grew a following of being the Zero Waste Guy and everything like that. But everybody will have all those links there, so you can get a hold of them and see other stuff. And Jonathan, you should be zoiche. You should have the merit to continue doing good things in the world and taking out the trash wherever it needs to be done, and reducing the waste where it needs to be done, and doing the right thing. And I think just continuing to ride that middle path and thinking for yourself in the way that you have been, and this will lead you to where you need to be. So, l'chaim on that. Cheers, and thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.